So I'd like to introduce Steve Cooper from NextUp Solutions. He'll be introducing.
Yes. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes.
Great. Well, I am Steve Cooper from NextUp Solutions. We've got a great panel coming up for you here. I want to just give you a little background on what we do. One of the things that we do at NextUp is at the Acceleration Center, we're doing something that nobody ever has done before in the world, and that is we're harnessing the power of undergrad computer engineers at Virginia Tech and Radford, and soon to be a couple more universities, stay tuned for that, to work on real client projects supervised by us. So we're a professional services firm building software for our clients. And our clients are all over the world, federal agencies, nonprofits, and emerging startups. So that's what the Acceleration Center does. And it's just yet another cool thing that is going on in this world. So to introduce this panel, the panel title is What We Learned from the Pandemic So Far, Lessons Learned and How It Affects the Future of Work. I was on a meeting this morning and the speaker said this. He said, as we recover from a once in a century pandemic, and then he went on to make his point. And I thought about it and I kept saying, what is it about that statement that bothers me a little bit? And I want to use that to kick this panel off, because is it that we don't know whether it's once in a century? We don't know whether we're recovering or not. And we don't even really know whether this is, quote unquote, cliche, the new normal, or whether we're emerging into the new normal. So it's hard to know what the next chapter is, but that's what this panel is all about. Susan Soroko is going to take us through who's here to guide us through it. I think it should be a great, enriching discussion of what we've learned from the pandemic so far. Take it away, Susan.
Well, thank you for that, Steve. I can't help but feel as though you asked some really pointed questions. Can you all hear me? I feel like I've got a little bit of an echo going on. Okay. So welcome to this panel. We are really set to have really great voices in this panel. And I'd like for each of you on this panel to just give us a little brief background of who you are and who you represent. Let's start with you, Kimberly Blue.
Good afternoon. I'm Kimberly Blue, and I represent George Mason University. I am what's called a graduate career manager in the School of Business. And so I work with all the graduate students as it relates to their career development needs. So I'm pretty busy.
Good time of year for you. Paul
Yes.
Spiers, let's hear from you.
Thank you, Susan. I'm Paul Spiers. I'm founder of the new P&L Brand Purpose Institute. It's a corporate culture and management consultancy. And I'm also host of the new P&L Principles in Leadership and Business podcast series, which is a global weekly business leadership focused podcast.
And what time is it where you are?
It is 6:45 in the evening in the UK.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Cary Hatch, just a wonderful legend in our area. Give us a little bit of background for you.
Good afternoon. Delighted to be here. I'm Cary Hatch. I'm the CEO of MDB Communications. We're a full service advertising and marketing communications firm. We work regionally, domestically, and globally for, generally speaking, consumer facing brands. You might know some of our work locally here if you're in the DMV, as we affectionately call it, the DC Lottery, Chevy Chase Trust, but we also work internationally for many telco companies as well. So delighted to be here. I would be delinquent if I didn't mention Roy Rogers Restaurants. Go out and buy a roast beef sandwich.
What's exciting about this group on this panel is especially that you represent very different backgrounds and very different industries. But that also gives us the opportunity to hear about the threads of elements that really make your approach to problem solving and successes really relevant. So I'd like to start with a question about, being prepared for the unexpected. I mean, this year has given us, it's put out the welcome mat for what's unexpected that no one could really anticipate. So I'm going to go in reverse and start with Cary. Tell us a little bit about how you in your industry, I mean, advertising is a responsive industry. It's a forward-thinking industry that has to predict what people are looking for and what people are wanting. So you are in the catbird seat to be in the position of talking a little bit about what's unexpected.
Some people might say that I'm the canary in the coal mine. I see Paul's laughing. Yeah, it's an interesting industry. I'm hopelessly in love with what I do, but if you expect certainty, you're in the wrong industry. You need to be able to accept the fact that things are not going to be certain. We are responsive, as you mentioned, Susan, to the needs of brands, depending upon what category and industry you specialize in. For instance, some of my worthy competitors that were very heavy into tourism and hospitality are down 85% in terms of revenue. But being responsive to our clients, which are very diverse, is also the key to success here. There's nothing terribly certain about what we do. What is certain is our brand's needs for our counsel, whether that's CSR initiatives to be responsive to societal opportunities and needs, or advancing their products or services. And in some cases, based upon what's happened over the last 18 months, that's totally reframing, totally reworking, and working independently and collectively with your team and your clients in a distributed workforce.
Well said. Paul, I'm going to guess that there are some of those same principles that you must carry in your work as well. What can you tell us about maybe some things that have been unexpected in your world?
Absolutely. I mean, I tend to agree in principle with Cary. I think the last 18 months have been, the extent of the crisis has been extreme, but anyone in business who expects to have some sort of certainty in business is really reading yesterday's news, because I think businesses carries uncertainty inherently within it. And I think within that uncertainty carries challenges. It also carries enormous opportunities. And many of the clients we've spoken to over the last 18 months, if you think about the levels of innovation and creativity the necessity has forced upon them, I guess, in terms of trying to reach customers when the shutters have come down on a retail store, for example. They've had to go online. They've had to find new ways and new channels to reach their customers. That level of innovation and that level of creativity has, although it's been a challenge, has also excited many customers and many clients. And they're excited about how they bring some of that learning from the last 18 months into their business moving forward. So whilst necessity has bred and forced innovation and creativity over the last 18 months, I think the aggregate effect over the medium term will be positive on business, because many have discovered levels of innovation and creativity they haven't experienced for a very long time.
I think that in our preparation call prior to this last week, you had something to say that stuck with me, which is you said we're emerging from a phase of complacent innovation. So, I think that really says a lot about what's probably been a hidden or an undervalued opportunity for many people for a long time. And I think that I've seen a lot of that example at GMU and Kimberly Blue. You can talk a little bit about, how the programs that you've been doing, students are not there. As we said, you can't really read the room. You don't have them all sitting in front of you to be able to understand what their needs are specifically. So you've come up with some very interesting approaches to how to provide those experiences. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, 18 months ago, we had to pivot, and the university pivoted quickly to do a lot online and work with students. And I would say having and being a part of office where you're student facing, what I do is really student facing. And I had to really pivot and think about how can I effectively deliver services to students online? And so doing that, it was real interesting because normally when I do workshops, I'm able to read the room. I'm able to see the students' responses and kind of, anticipate, where we're going to go next in a discussion. Well, being on Zoom, that was a totally different kind of phenomena. You can't read the room, you're reading heads. So when you're reading heads, you're not really reading the room the way you think you are. And so having to kind of work through that allowed us to be more innovative. Actually, it allowed us to touch more students because students were able to log on easier than trying to get to the campus, park the car, and then come into the workshop. So it became a way for us to be more innovative in how we touch students. Several other things, I worked closely with a couple of programs, and one of the programs, there's a requirement. They have to do an internship. And so I began to think, we're in the midst of a pandemic. Everything's going to be online. This is not going to be the same as 2019. So we had to think out of the box. How can we give students that experiential experience of learning in an organization without having them physically go there? And so we thought of a program called Research Ships. Research Ships help students to work in organizations because of what we're talking about today and why we're here today. Being resilient, having to think out of the box. Companies did, as our first speaker talked about, they were flat-footed when we had to pivot. And so we came up with the idea to help companies kind of move, post-pandemic, or we're still in it, what are they going to do? What's their new business model going to be like? And so we thought we would pilot it, and it actually turned out really well. Several of the organizations, yourself, Arlington Economic Development and Arlington Federal Credit Union, came on board, didn't know what was going to happen, but it ended up turning out really well. And there were variables you can't control, and I always prepare for the unexpected. But this time it actually worked for us. So those were some of the ways I had to think out of the box, not being able to read the room or not being able to be student facing. And it actually worked for us and it worked for the students.
Yeah, you actually came up with a way to provide them with that real-time experience and took advantage of technology in the best way that you possibly could under the circumstances. That really leads us to how important it is to encourage collaborations and a healthy workplace. And that is another thing that, again, without being in the room together, without being able to pick up our social cues, our professional cues from each other, what are some of the ways that you have thought about and reached in a little bit deeper to come up with collaborations and a healthy workplace? Cary, I'll go over to you.
So I'm the first to admit, when this first started for us, March 13th of 2020, I said, oh, this will be over by May. And eventually, I'm a people person. I get my energy from people. For me personally, this was a bummer. For many on my team, it was a bummer. But at a certain point, you embrace the notion of you can be bitter or you can be better.
That's right.
And I stopped feeling sorry for myself because there were so many that were so much more less fortunate than I. And I turned that around in two ways. In terms of my team, I started trying to personalize touch points. And I use that metaphorically, of course, because, social distancing is really not fun. Actually, it sucks. But sending individual cards out, personalized cards to my team. Sometimes I would be sending out shots of tequila, different fun activities. I mean, we all did all kinds of trivia and what have you online, but sending personalized notes for people helped me and it helped them. Care packages, giving out, additional days off as coupons and what have you, fun things, not to make light of a serious situation, but to take some of the misery out of being, and I hate to say it, but Zoom calls all day long can be trying for a lot of people. Now I better understand why people turn off their camera, But so you can be bitter or you can be better and try to make the best of it and For me, staying connected, and that means to our clients, our team, our vendors. I am someone who likes to meet in person, but that's a personal choice. And as I said to our controller yesterday, I'm not going to die on this hill. I'm not going to be an employer or a leader who insists upon people to violate their own boundaries to keep a position. I'm not doing it.
Wow, well said. We're all going to take that be better or bitter away with us for sure. That really sums a lot of it up. Paul, I don't know if in your world, if a lot of your work had already been in a face-to-face environment, or if you had already been moving into a direction of a lot of, consult over the, online or over the phone. So tell us a little bit about your work model and how you've had to look at collaborations differently.
It was a bit of both because we work on a global basis as well. But I think the pandemic's only really accentuated the challenges or the opportunities that a business already faces. So those clients that we've worked with who are committed to purpose and committed to creativity and collaboration and positive company cultures, they found a way to get through the pandemic and to continue to find their purpose and create a great culture and collaborate because they are committed to exactly those things. And those company cultures that were already perhaps toxic, or they struggled to collaborate and struggled to come together as a team, that it only accentuated the divisions within them. So I think things like the pandemic only serve to accentuate the challenges that already exist in a business. And many of the clients that we've spoken to have found very unique ways to keep that company culture going. And Cary gave some great examples there as well. And many of the technologies that, collaborative technologies and visual technologies that people have installed and utilized over the last 18 months, they will bring on stream as they move to a more hybrid model as well. But I'm not concerned about the great companies that went into this pandemic, because they will find ways to collaborate, find ways to maintain that culture because they're committed to it. And it only exposes the challenges with those who already had those problems and maybe before the pandemic were able to paper over them or create a veneer of some sort of positive company culture. It's only exposed that, I think.
Wow. Yeah, the cream always rises to the top when they're good. Kimberly, in your world, academics have a fairly set path about how they deliver, your content. Let's say, you are there to bring a curriculum to your audience. You're there to prepare the next generation of a workforce for whatever area they're specializing in. So it seems to me as though this has given you and given GMU an opportunity to think differently about interdepartment collaborations and how that has really driven what the health of your workplace is like. So tell us about that on more, kind of on the faculty side.
Excellent. As I said earlier, we all had to pivot to figure out how we were going to we can deliver services, but effectively deliver our services to students. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we wanted to make sure is that we were all on the same page in how we were working with our students. And part of that was really with some of the services that are student focused, really partnering with the academic side, the faculty, and how we were going to work with students. I teach a class too, but my class is a little different in the way I teach it. But that's where the researchship came in, because me and a faculty member, Dr. Victoria Grady, came together with this program to think about how we wanted to affect students in this kind of pandemic. And it, like I said earlier, it really worked out because we were really checking up on each other. It was a way for us to make sure that the students were okay, because that's one of the ways that we wanted to collaborate to make sure is everybody that's in our sphere and everybody that we're working with, are they okay? Because like I said, you can't read a room, you're reading Zoom. And so that made me be more focused in on who I work with, even across campus, within campus, working with faculty, but even across campus, and looking at other services that we might had to bring in to make it an effective year for our students. And so when we talked about some of the things that we were going to do with our students, I was very pleasantly surprised that most of the faculty, most of the staff that we had to collaborate activities with were on board. And they felt that everything that we were doing as it related to students, and especially this researchship, it really worked out. I always say that I can control the pieces of the puzzle, but I couldn't control, the reaction of the students, the reaction of the company. And so we were fairly lucky in that all the pieces were well put together, but the students, I think, because of our collaboration and interaction with them, did well in these opportunities. And the companies that we work with did well. And faculty that we talked about this particular opportunity with work well with us. And we're very excited about us doing this. So one other thing that I would say in regards to this whole process, and it's almost like our well-being, I made it a point as someone in the graduate school to check up on colleagues, to make sure that they were doing okay, and that if they were to deliver a service to our students, are you able to deliver it? Are you able to deliver it in the way that in which you want? So checking up on them and how they were going to work with our students, to me, was very important, because that can affect the health of our student and our program. So it was kind of three different prongs that we were working with: the students, the faculty, and us, the staff, to make sure everything went well at George Mason University as it related to collaboration.
I think you can claim that you are the unique ones, that you are the pioneers of that approach, because that is not something that is the typical experience with having students interface with public sector or the private sector, I'm sure. So bravo. I think that a lot of the things that you're saying really fit well with kind of the next piece of this, which is, how do we can maintain a renewed focus on the work-life balance? I mean, people, I think, talked a lot about work-life balance prior to the pandemic from the standpoint of whether people were working part-time. We had many fewer people who were teleworking at the time. And now we have seen, what's being typically called the Great Resignation, that people have experienced this past year in such extreme ways that they are just abandoning their positions altogether, for better or for worse. And so I think that for a company, and I'll move over to you, Cary, now, to say, this is going to be an even more important component of retention. We all talk about in economic development about business attraction and retention, but we also talk about the talent pool, and we talk about, how are companies, do they want to come to a place like Arlington for the talent? And is the talent going to stay here? Is the talent going to be restless? Is the talent going to, what do they need to be able to stay committed to working for you if they're the right fit? So maybe that's given you some opportunities to be relieved about people as much as it is to look at who you really want to foster. But talk a little bit about that, because that's another leadership challenge of, what do you do to make sure that people are staying connected?
Well, the good news is it's an opportunity with a distributed workforce. We've hired people, in Washington State and Florida and New York. It gives us the opportunity to hire a more diverse group of talented individuals. My industry has less than 5% people of color. And I don't say that proudly. I say that as an opportunity to look nationwide or even outside of our own country to attract and retain people. So from that standpoint, it's a wonderful and brilliant opportunity. I will say it's also a humbling thing as a leader for all the leaders that are on this call. Just know that there is no model of perfection as we go through this. We're building the plane as we're flying it. Everyone is. Anyone who says they aren't are lying. Okay. So we're doing the best we can. So there's empathy for the workforce. There's empathy for your employer, the leaders. Your own self-care through this is an important factor, because the optimism, authentic optimism, back to your point about being authentic, authentic optimism is an imperative, and how you model your own behavior will be reflected in your team.
Right.
So I, as you know, Susan, for many years have been very keen on attracting and retaining talent to the DMV. You know, native Washingtonian, love this region. In order to make us more competitive, we do have to have a diverse workforce, but the cost of living here can be a challenge. Working with a distributed workforce allows us to acquire that talent. They may or may not have to be in the DMV.
Wow. And so in a lot of ways, you know, you may wind up with more Zoom calls with your staff rather than fewer, because they're in different time zones and probably in different cultures. So Paul, I want to hear from you a little bit about what kinds of things that you're coming up with or taking away that you're advising, and how are you consulting with your clients to say, you know, here are the things to be on the lookout for, particularly when it comes to collaborations and a healthy workplace, because, you know, I'd love to hear what you are thinking about as you are doing your advising.
I think Kimberly gave a great example just before in terms of one of the key threads to retention, and that is the collaborative communication, you know, having a dialogue with those stakeholders, not just a monologue as a leader. And many of the clients we're speaking to, I don't think any of these things are particularly rocket science. They are thinking about, with intention, thinking about the people you're speaking to, communicating with them, not making any assumptions about what they understand or what they don't understand, but asking them the questions and bringing them into the conversation rather than talking at them. And I think the statistics show, and certainly many conversations I've had also demonstrate, that many people leave a job not necessarily because of salary or even promotion, but because they feel they're not listened to, they're not engaged, that it's always leaders talking at them, not with them. So I think some of these things are really basic human principles rather than any sort of business methodology to ensure retention. It's treating people with respect and trusting people and treating people as peers in business, regardless of whatever role you happen to play, whether you happen to be a CEO or you happen to be an account exec or an assistant or whatever the case may be. We all have a voice, we all have an ability, we all have a creative contribution to make in that business. And, you know, I think for leaders to recognize the relative privileged position they hold and remember when they started in their roles or when they were in mid-management in their roles and how they felt and the voice that they feel they didn't have at that point in time. As I say, I don't think any of this is anything more than how we relate to each other as humans. And the more we speak to each other with that respect and with that empathy and with that authenticity, the more we will retain people on the basis, not of their role and not of their salary, but on the basis that we respect them and they understand that.
You know, you I think touched on something that Antonio led off with, which was that moment of making sure that you pause along the way. And pausing in this scenario, I think, is a way of remembering that we need to listen, and that rather than a leader being the one who's doing all the talking, but to be able to stop and hear the people, whether they're your peers or whether there are your employees or whether they're your clients, is can be a tough lesson to learn. But this has certainly, I think this set of circumstances is a good reminder of how important that key, not rocket science, but harder to do than it sounds, is to really listen. I want to also just hit on the fact that one of the important components in this leadership role is how do you stick true to your principles while you're really moving around and changing physical spaces? I mean, that is, you don't have the confines of the physical structure to be able to say, let's meet over here, or just while we were in this meeting, somebody had left a laptop in this conference room that I'm in that I had reserved, and wasn't thinking that there would be somebody else in here. But that's going to be certainly something that will be an ongoing challenge, is how do you find the way to connect in these shared spaces that are going to be completely different than they were 18 months ago. So Kimberly, I don't know whether your classrooms or your offices are taking on a different role than they once were, but tell us a little bit about how George Mason is looking at that. I mean, you're on the cusp of, building out a new extension to a campus here in Arlington.
Right.
So
We are.
I can only imagine that architecturally, that's going to be one of the really important factors, is how are we managing to stick to our principles in a space that's not the same as it was.
That's really apropos or appropriate so much now. Today I'm working from home, but there are a couple of days a week I do go into the office. And it has been a struggle, I'm not going to lie. It's very different to go back in. And I think we as George Mason University, I think many of us on campus, I don't know if it's a struggle for everyone, but I think it's different for everyone. We've entered into the new normal. And with this new normal, I remember pre-COVID, we would talk about we didn't have enough space at Arlington. Everybody doesn't have an office. We have an abundance of space now because you have people now that are working from home several days a week. We're building the new annex, to that space as well. But it brings up several things that I want to go back to that I think are real important. It ties directly into this. How people show up daily is key.
Mm-hmm.
That is so key, whether you're physically there or whether you're on, digitally, whether you're, on your laptop. Do you have your camera on or do you have your camera off? It is almost the same thing when you would go into the office. How are you feeling that day? So it's the same thing. And so we are going to have to get used to that new normal. And at a university setting, we as faculty and staff have to be mindful of what we do and how we do it, because we're influencing students. They're watching us. They're watching everything that we do. So how we navigate this is going to be key. And I would say for my job specifically, how I navigate and my authentic self in regards to how I'm feeling daily is key, because I coach students. I do career coaching. So I'm talking to them of how they have to show up on their job. So it's almost like what I exhibit and what I model, the students are going to be taking away and thinking about how I'm talking to them and what they have to do on their job. So George Mason as a university, it's how we show up. It's being mindful of every day, being present, being focused as much as you can be. And then I always have to drive into students to let them know. And it's something you said, Cary, about, everything has expanded. It is so true. When I'm coaching students about job opportunities, I have to remind them how you show up is going to be key. It's different than going into the office for the interview. You might interview on Zoom, but do know your competition has tripled, because people over in Peru could interview for your job here in Northern Virginia. So be very mindful of how we do things. And I think for my job and George Mason University, I will say one thing. We have a great university, great president of the university, of how he came in the midst of the pandemic and had to take on what he had to take on. And I think he's led the university well. And I think the university, we have fared fairly well these last 18 months. I can't complain. We have the freedom to do certain things. And so I think it has worked out well for us, but I just would say everybody needs to be mindful of how you show up every day to the job, whether it's on Zoom or whether it's in person.
This is a question that came in the chat that is that I'm gonna throw in here because it's really interesting. One of our participants says, as a small business owner, one of my issues has been dealing with various government, commercial, universities, and colleges is that many of the employees seem unprofessional in their communications. How are owners, managers handling these issues? And I can't help when I read that, I thought, unprofessional. Is that just because they're wearing t-shirts and flip-flops? Is it how does that translate? Does that put us in a completely different? Are we staying our professional best? I joke that, I have to wear earrings all the time because it reminds me that, I'm showing up in a particular way. So I'd love to hear your experiences with how you are, really making sure that people take you seriously, regardless of where you're sitting, if the cat is behind you, or, what's happening in your physical world. But is that a detriment, or does that make us more, approachable? Paul, what do you think?
I mean, this is a perennial conversation over the last 18 months, I think. I think there are two sides to it. There is, on the one side, I guess it depends on what your definition of professional language is, because everyone has a different way of communicating, and that could be generational, it could be cultural, it could be many other different aspects of conversation and communication. The other side of it is, I think, in an ironic way, this more remote environment has made us all more human. You've seen that CEO or that managing director that maybe you only ever saw in an office in some sort of suit. You've now seen her or his kids run past the back of the screen, and you've had a laugh over it, and you've had a conversation around it, and you've drawn some sort of emotional resonance to her or him as a result. So I think it is challenging to find a meeting point with lots of different conversations and lots of different ways of approaching conversations and communications. But I do think, again, the aggregate effect the irony is that the aggregate effect will be that we've come to understand each other in a more personal way over the course of this pandemic, in a way that we didn't get to know each other in the office or in some of our more formal communications. But because of those laptops falling off the end of the desk, or kids running behind, or dogs barking in the background, we've all had to accept that there is life as well as business. And I can't help but feel that's got to be good in the medium term.
I wonder if anyone's measuring that, but
Yeah.
It sounds fascinating. Cary, you've probably had, I think that in your world, I mean, I'm looking back, remembering that when Arnold Advertising had moved their headquarters to Arlington, and they had gone to quite an incredible extent to have a space that was not only culturally reflective of their work, but very futuristic looking. I think somebody once said it looks like the inside of an iPhone. It was, super white. It was an absolutely jaw-dropping kind of an environment. And I think that your industry is probably noted for having those unusually eccentric and unique and beautiful and eye-popping kinds of environments. So how do you, now that people are not in those spaces all the time anymore, how do you retain that level of the principle of I'm really functioning from the place where I am? How do you do that? Because that's where a lot of the creative juices come from, is being in that kind of wildly interesting environment.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, I so appreciate Paul's remarks and Kimberly's remarks, because it's interesting when you think about internal teaming on an assignment versus how you have to show up for a client, or in our case, pitch work. So the image you project and how you show up is quite different, because to your point, Susan, like it or not, we're evaluated on not just the content of the ideas that we present and the prospect of success for whatever brand we're pitching. It's, do you want to work with these people? How do they connect with each other? You are judged on your space. You are collaborating. I believe that advertising is a team sport. Team for me doesn't mean distributed. So that's something I've had to overcome. The background that you see behind me, while it is virtual, is an actual photo of our reception area. This gives me the opportunity to show up looking professional despite the fact that I'm on a green screen. A lot of my staff, my team, have embraced a seamless, if you will, or a step and repeat with our logo on the back, so that when we pitch business, we're branding ourselves. So and I agree with how you show up. And frankly, you're right. I mean, I know more dogs' names. I know more kids' names. I mean, all of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that because fundamentally, it's the people. That's the talent behind any agency. It's the people. But how you show up for business and the discipline with which you execute that is important as well. Not every client wants to know every cat and dog's name. They're more about what's in their best interest. We put together early on in the pandemic a little thing that says, I'm not here to be average, I'm here to be awesome. And we had some guardrails, if you will, in terms of expectations from each other in, at that time, what was the new remote work policy. You know, believe in yourself, believe in each other, be positive, take responsibility, share the credit, ask for help, offer help, give respect, be honest, don't leave others hanging. So all of those things have lent themselves to better connective tissue, better ideas, better performance, frankly, from our client's perspective, and have allowed us to exist and be successful in something that was totally new. And I was that bitter person who had to choose to be better. But generally, I think we all at some point had to, and embrace the things that allowed us to be successful as humans with our families, but also earn and contribute to the organization and to our clients.
Really well said. You know, I'm going to go back to you, Kimberly, for a minute, because I had another George Mason University, and I should say that, you know, for the sake of, I quickly went to the acronym because we live in a place where everything is an acronym, and I referred to you as GMU, and there may be folks on this call who are not familiar with George Mason University. It's one of the state's largest universities, if not, is it the largest?
I think it is in Virginia.
Yeah. But, you know, I would actually like to ask you how you prepare students for going out into how they're showing up for their work experience, their coaching experience. And I'll tell you a story that right after the grad student that I had from your program, I had another George Mason University undergrad student who joined me for an internship. And on our first day of connecting, he showed up with wearing a tie, you know, a jacket and a tie. And I was so shocked. I hadn't seen anybody in a tie, any gentleman wearing a tie and a jacket in so long. And I said, "You're wearing a tie." It took me so by surprise. And he said, "Well, I'm here because, you know, this is a work experience." So, you know, he didn't come out of your area, but, you know, a completely different division of Mason. But tell us a little bit about what that's like, of how you are coaching, because again, you know, the lines are blurred of
That's right.
You know, whether you are there in a buttoned up appearance or whether you are there in a super casual one. So, you know, there's got to be some fine line of guidance that you're giving students about how they're expected to show up.
Absolutely. And we tackle this, first of all, we tackle this anyway, whether it's a COVID situation or we're not in COVID. So that's something that we do on the regular. But when we had to pivot last year, students were in a panic, like, what am I going to do? Am I going to get a job? And so we pulled them off from the ledge and said, yes, you are. But in pulling them from the ledge, it was a matter of how they were going to show up. And it was real interesting because I teach a class anyway where they have to do videos for me about their experience. And I'd be coaching them anyway about their videos of what's in the background. I don't want to see your boyfriend run across the back of the room. You need to make sure that your environment is such a place where you're taping this video that is presentable. And so that was just one thing in regards to the video. In coaching them in regards to interviewing online was a whole different ball game. Like I said, pre-COVID, you need to show up and you need to show up well. But being on Zoom, Skype, Teams, these types of things are platforms that companies are using, Interview Stream, that are using to interview students and interview people for opportunities. It was a whole new area. And I laugh because I have seen some things that I probably should not have seen. I had to coach students in regards to how they need to look. You still need to look presentable, even if it's from the waist up. I don't care if you have on shorts or whatever, but from the waist up, you need to look like you're ready to play ball and ready to play ball seriously. And I agree with what Cary said. How you show up professionally is key because you're still being judged. If you were face to face with the person, they're looking at, what you're wearing to the office. Even though you're on Zoom, do your hair, make sure you don't have a t-shirt on, some simple things that you would think they would have known about, they did not. And then the other thing is where you choose to put your laptop and the background behind is key. Make your bed up. If you have a roommate, like simple things like this, I would laugh because when I look at these videos, I'm like, are you kidding me? And so when we did mock interviews, and I mocked some students, we made sure that their backgrounds were appropriate. If you have to put a virtual background on, put a virtual background on. Make sure that you're in a space where there's not a lot of distractions, because even though it's on Zoom, they're still judging you. Now they're judging you in a different way. Normally you'd be able to go to their campus or to that office to interview. They're coming into your world and they're seeing more of your world and how you kind of represent kind of where you live, how you live. They're able to see this. And so I had to kind of press upon students that it's still appropriate to be professional, even though we're in a more virtual types of spaces. And believe it or not, many of the companies that come to George Mason universities that I work with and talk to, they prefer virtual. They prefer that they don't necessarily need to come to campus to interview our students. They'd rather interview them virtually, which poses that, very thing about making sure that you show up appropriately and professionally. And so students, what I have found, are starting to do that. But it's something that we tackled way last year to make sure that students were doing the appropriate thing. And we had, mock interviewing. And the other thing is how to utilize different digital platforms. Always prepare for the unexpected, prepare for technical difficulties, but don't let that throw your game. Your screen will always go out. You will always talk when it's mute. But when you finally get back to where you need to be in that interview, don't let it throw you off. You still are able to get that job. You just still need to make the great impression. This impression now is in a virtual space. So we work with students on that daily.
It's kind of ironic when you think about the generation that is the digital generation, where they are more comfortable on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all of these platforms that are very visually driven. That they, funny enough, they're not shy about posting pictures of themselves in just about every scenario, but yet they don't have that awareness of the shift between what it looks like to be professional and what it looks like to be very, very, maybe a little too social.
Yes, absolutely.
So I wanted to, oh yeah. So we have a comment that is worth sharing. Hal's daughter's first day ever as a lawyer at her new firm was yesterday via Zoom. She had sweatpants and slippers on with nice clothes on from the waist up. So yeah, I don't think there's anyone on the face of the planet who has not had that experience of, you know, wearing super comfy from the waist down and, you know, something professional from the waist up. As long as you're wearing your earrings, you're good. So I really love the way that you have all contributed to this great conversation. And I wanted to just kind of cap off with the piece that is probably one of the most amorphous and challenging to really even put a label on or figure out how to measure, because you may not be able to, is how do you have happy employees and customers? Now, Cary, you may have kind of scratched the surface of that by picking out care package items that are bound to at least make people realize that their happiness quotient is different than it once was. But Paul, how are you looking at that? I mean, obviously, if it goes beyond, I think we're at a point where it goes beyond satisfaction. You know, we talk about customer or employee satisfaction with their work or with their experience with a company, if they're going to be a repeat customer, or if they're going to stay as an employee for a long time. But I'm going to guess that the happiness factor is going to play a bigger role than it once did, as kind of rising up the list of what's important to people, whether they're on the receiving end or whether they're on the, you know, providing service end. So Paul, tell us a little bit about how you're looking at that, like the happiness factor for both employees and customers.
Well, happiness is relative and it's subjective, isn't it? So it's a very hard thing to measure.
The question. Come on.
No, not at all, not at all. But it's very hard to measure. But I think the first principle for measuring it is to understand where employees or customers are now, because you can't measure what the happiness is now if we haven't measured it 6 months ago to understand where the shift comes negatively or positively. So I think for most companies, and certainly some that we're dealing with, we're looking at happiness in the whole person. So we're looking at it in their role, but we're also looking at it and what they want personally from their role as well as professionally. What excites them in a personal level, how we can mold that into their role. Is there a way that they can meet their personal passions and their professional ambitions, and how we pull that into the conversation with their role as well? Because I think the time is well past for us to turn up separately in our professional lives and our personal lives. You know, we don't put on, certainly we don't at the moment, but we don't put on that figurative suit to draw your earlier example and turn up to work and be that professional woman or man and then go home and be something different. We are a whole person now. So in terms of measuring that happiness, the way we're doing it at the moment is to draw a line in the sand with some of our clients and say, where are people personally and professionally now? Where are their ambitions personally and professionally? And what are the questions around that? Because too many leaders and CEOs, I think, and managers ask the questions that they want the answers to that will satisfy the professional question rather than asking the personal to that individual and asking them, understanding what they feel in relation to themselves rather than just what they feel in relation to their business. So I think some of the conversations we're having now, as I say, are really trying to understand the whole person and where they sit and what they're bringing to work personally and professionally, and how we can mold those two things together. And then it will be a 6 month or a 3 month or a 9 month or a 12 month review to pull that back in and see how successful we've been as leaders and managers and CEOs in terms of molding the professional and the personal together and ensuring those professional and personal ambitions are somehow meeting themselves in that role, in their job.
Well said. Cary, I'm going to guess that you've probably had some surprises along the way. And tell us a little bit about what things that you've discovered about what might make your customers and your employees happy.
Wow, loaded question. But yes, you know, talk about reading the room. It's reading the whole person, including your clients. Some clients will run up to you with open arms with a huge hug. Other people, you know, even at the Washington football team suite the other day, you know, will just give you an elbow. Other people won't show up at all. So, you know, everyone is different. And Paul, I don't think I could improve upon what he said. It's that sweet spot for each individual person. That's why it's so hard for managers and leaders to figure this out. It's that sweet spot between what works for them personally and professionally, and where's the intersection with business goals and opportunity? Because that's where the happiness lies. So imagine that you've got that as a distributed workforce with all different sweet spots. That's what we're looking for. Clients are the same way. I was just up, you know, last week visiting a client on site. They couldn't wait to take their mask off and say hello and catch up on everything and what's happening with your kids. And, you know, let's do things in person soon. Other people have never been back to the office since March of 2020. So knowing your clients, knowing where they're at in this great experiment is key to being a participant in each person's happiness, because that's what we want to do. I earlier said I wasn't going to die on this hill, and I'm not, but I'd be foolish if I led you to believe it wasn't exhausting to try to figure out what that is for every individual. But that's my job. That's my job. So, you know, being flexible, having clarity of expectations, being flexible, and having that empathy, I think will get us through this. And I honestly believe we're going to be more connected, the connective tissue for the relationships, whether that's internal to my own team or with our clients, I think are going to be stronger for things like the kids and the cats or the elbow bumping or whatever. Respecting that other person's needs is, I think, centered to success.
Cary, you're making me hopeful that maybe we can start getting rid of corporate mottos.
Maybe.
It's much more about the individual relationship. Kimberly, I'm going to give you kind of the last word on, you know, how you are, you know, again, you know, obviously one of the things, the key pieces in academics is to successfully find a way for the student to come out of the program ready for the real world and ready for prime time. And prime time is, you know, there's a lot of channels out there now. They're going to be binging, and, you know, I'll give you all the media analogies, but nonetheless, I think that is something that it would be very interesting to hear from you in kind of that last word piece of, you know, how are you satisfying the parents as well as satisfying the students, because it's often the parents who are, you know, driving whether the student is going to come to that school and what they're going to get out of it. So tell us a little bit about how you're looking at that.
You know, thank God I'm on the graduate side of the house, so I don't have a lot of parents to deal with. So that's a plus. But I will say, dealing with the different groups of students that I work with, I think the key thing is how students are managing themselves and what's important to them. When I coach and work with a student, I always sit down and my first thing is I can be very transactional or I can be transformational. And I don't like to be transactional. That's, you know, the resume and, you know, just kind of very surfacey. I like to be more transformational and talk to them about their values. What are their deal breakers? What are the things now that we're in this new reset, new normal, that you have to redefine that you thought was important to you pre-COVID, that has now become important to you as we're in this pandemic. And so students are having to rethink their whole kind of personal missions of what's been important to them, how they navigate the workplace, how they are developing work-life balance. And so I kind of help them walk through that. My job, I like what I do because, like I said, I can be very transactional, but being transformational gets them to think deeper about who they are and being their authentic self in the workplace and being authentic, you know, with their families. And as everybody has said, because of we're living in a virtual space, everybody has had to do that because they've seen your house. They've seen whether you have books or you're in your library or not. They've seen the kids run around. They've heard the dog bark. So I think that helps them with their own personal values. And what I try to do is make sure that we discuss that now. That's a part of the coaching process. That's a part of who they are. When students are looking for opportunities and jobs, you know, I talk to them not just about the job and just about the transactional. I talk to them about, okay, why do you want this position? How is this going to help you and make your life better because you applied for it for a reason? And so what is it that you want to do in going from A to Z to make this work in your world? And so I think that's very important in how we are approaching. And it's something that Cary said, I think she said it in passing, but it was real key. In regards to the business schools nowadays, or just any department or anybody that's kind of pushing students out there to go get opportunities and jobs, especially business schools, because I'm in the business school, we have to rethink things too. Professors are rethinking, what are we teaching our students? Because this is a new business model, a new business world now, where we will never be like March 1st, 2020, ever again. We're totally different. And so knowing that, universities have to rethink, okay, we're graduating students, and are we graduating them for the world that we have now? Is it appropriate? So we're having to make, you know, changes and thoughts about, you know, what are we producing? And like I said, thank God I don't have to worry about the parents, but when I'm working with a lot of MBA students who are already working, and they're coming to see me, that can be challenging in a good way too, because they're challenging themselves and their workspace and their work world and what they're doing. And they're rethinking their work-life balance. You know, they're working at particular companies and they want work-life balance. So we're having to rethink, you know, those types of models of the types of students that we're producing. And when you're coming to college, getting this degree, what does that mean? And so that's how we're focused in on kind of this new normal, this new reset. I think it's a positive thing because I think it gets back to people not being so robotic, but being really true to themselves of what they really want out of their life and out of their world of work.
Oh, thank you. You know, I don't want this conversation to end. And Kimberly, we're going to be hearing more about education in our December event. But for today, I want to thank you all for the way that you have just given such wonderful, you know, insights and information and ways that you have approached your leadership, because that is really telling that across the board, it really does take unique personalities and unique and constant drive. You're doing a lot of it in many different ways. So thank you again, all three of you, for being on this panel and contributing to a really great conversation. We've gotten really good comments in the chat, so we're happy to say that you've contributed very well. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.